What if I told you that beneath one of the most heavily guarded borders on Earth, U.S. forces uncovered a tunnel so deep, so advanced, and so disturbing that its true purpose was never revealed to the public? In the winter of 1996, along the frozen ridgelines near the Korean demilitarized zone, a routine seismic monitoring operation picked up vibrations that did not match artillery, did not match vehicle movement, and certainly did not match natural tectonic shifts, because these tremors were rhythmic, precise, and repeated every single night at exactly 2:17 a.m., as if something mechanical was breathing beneath the soil. At first, analysts at Camp Casey assumed faulty sensors, but when 3 independent systems confirmed identical readings, a quiet chain of classified messages began moving through military channels, and within 72 hours, a joint task force was assembled under a code name that would never appear in public records, Task Force Ironveil, composed of U.S. Army engineers, special operations personnel, seismic experts, and 2 civilian geologists who were sworn into temporary federal secrecy agreements before being flown in under cover of darkness. Satellite imagery showed nothing unusual on the surface, no construction, no supply movement, no visible excavation sites, yet underground imaging told a different story, revealing a hollow structure stretching nearly 4 miles northward beneath the border at a depth of approximately 300 feet, far deeper than any previously discovered North Korean infiltration tunnel, and reinforced with materials that reflected radar in a way that suggested layered steel and composite shielding. The first breach attempt began 5 nights later, under the pretense of routine maintenance drills near the southern perimeter, when a concealed drilling platform was lowered into position and began boring vertically into the suspected cavity, the operation running silent. Generators to avoid acoustic detection, and at 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before the usual tremor, the drill punched through empty space, causing a sudden drop that nearly destabilized the platform. Below them was not loose dirt or a rough carved passage, but a smooth cylindrical shaft lined with polished alloy panels, each etched with coded markings that none of the linguists on site immediately recognized. Captain Elias Mercer, a decorated combat engineer with experience in subterranean warfare, volunteered to descend first, clipped into a reinforced harness, infrared camera mounted to his helmet, oxygen levels carefully monitored as he disappeared into the darkness. What he reported back through static-filled comms sent a silence across the command tent, because instead of a crude military tunnel, he described a corridor wide enough to drive armored vehicles through, illuminated not by exposed wiring but by recessed light strips embedded seamlessly into the walls, powered by an energy source that was active, humming faintly even after decades of concealment. The air was cold but filtered, carrying none of the dampness typical of underground structures, and the floor bore no dust, no footprints, as if it had been maintained by an unseen system. When the rest of the entry team joined Mercer, they advanced cautiously, weapons raised, scanning for traps or ambush points, yet the corridor remained eerily empty, stretching forward in a perfectly straight line before curving gently out of sight. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the tremor returned, but this time they felt it from within, a vibration that pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat, causing the embedded lights to flicker momentarily before stabilizing again. And that was when Sergeant Daniel Cho noticed something carved into a metallic panel near the curve of the tunnel. Not Korean script, not Chinese characters, but a series of geometric patterns resembling circuitry diagrams fused with archaic symbols. Patterns that would later confound Pentagon cryptographers for months. Deeper inside, approximately half a mile from the entry shaft, the team encountered the first anomaly, a massive reinforced steel door sealed flush with the tunnel wall. No visible hinges, no mechanical handles, only a circular indentation at its center, about the size of a human palm, surrounded by faintly glowing etchings. Thermal imaging detected warmth behind the barrier, not explosive residue, not machinery heat, but a steady internal temperature consistent with active systems. And when Captain Mercer pressed his gloved hand against the indentation out of curiosity, the etched lines illuminated brighter, responding to contact before fading again, as if awaiting a specific biometric signature. Command ordered the team to pull back temporarily while engineers prepared remote scanning devices. But before they could retreat more than 50 feet, the vibration intensified, stronger than before, causing dust to cascade from unseen seams in the ceiling, and the steel door emitted a low-frequency resonance that interfered with their radios, replacing clear communication with fragmented whispers of static that almost sounded like distorted voices. One operator later claimed he heard his own name repeated faintly through the interference, though audio analysis would attribute it to signal feedback. Nevertheless, morale shifted, tension thickening in the confined air, because this was no simple infiltration route meant to deploy soldiers southward. This was infrastructure built with precision and intention beyond conventional military planning. When remote drones were deployed to examine the door, their feeds cut out within seconds of approaching the indentation, screens going black as if electromagnetic pulses were triggered in proximity. It was then that a decision was made at the highest level present. Breach the door manually. Shaped charges were carefully placed around the perimeter, the team retreating to a safe distance within the tunnel, ears ringing even through protective gear as the detonation thundered through the cylindrical passage. Yet when the smoke cleared, the door remained intact, its surface unmarred, absorbing the blast as if the energy had dissipated into it. A second, more concentrated charge was authorized, and this time, a hairline fracture appeared along the edge, revealing a glimpse of darkness beyond. A darkness not of unlit space but of depth, vast and echoing. As engineers worked to widen the opening, a sudden automated response activated within the tunnel. The recessed lights shifting from pale white to a deep crimson hue, bathing the corridor in warning color, and the tremor at 217 returned again, louder, longer, as if the structure itself recognized intrusion. Inside the command tent above ground, satellite feeds detected a brief surge of energy emanating from beneath the hillside, spiking in a pattern too complex to be random, and analysts exchanged uneasy glances because whatever this tunnel was, it was not abandoned, it was not forgotten, and it was not defenseless. When the fractured door was finally pried open enough for a camera probe to slip through, what appeared on the monitor silenced every conversation instantly. Beyond the barrier was not another corridor, not storage, not barracks, but a cavernous chamber stretching far wider than the tunnel itself, filled with towering structures arranged in symmetrical rows, metallic pillars extending from floor to ceiling, each pulsing faintly with the same rhythm as the tremors, and suspended at the center of the chamber was an object unlike anything catalogued in military intelligence. A massive spherical construct encased in a lattice of rotating rings, slowly turning in absolute silence, emitting that same low-frequency hum that had echoed through the walls. "Captain." Mercer whispered a single word into his mic before the feed flickered. "This isn't a tunnel?" And then the camera signal distorted completely, replaced by cascading lines of interference that no technician could immediately decode. While above ground, the clock ticked past 2:18 a.m., and for the first time since the monitoring began, the tremor did not stop. The tremor did not stop at 2:18 a.m., and that was the first detail that truly unsettled the analysts above ground, because for weeks the vibration had followed a strict pattern, a mechanical pulse that rose and fell with clockwork precision. Yet now it continued beyond its usual limit, stretching into a sustained resonance that caused instruments in the command tent to spike erratically, as if whatever lay beneath had shifted from passive operation to active response. Inside the tunnel, Captain Mercer steadied himself against the wall as the crimson lighting deepened into a darker shade, the air taking on a faint metallic scent, not of rust but of ionization, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. While Sergeant Cho attempted to recalibrate his comms unit only to hear fragmented bursts of sound layered beneath the static, tones that rose and fell in structured intervals, almost mathematical in cadence. When the interference briefly stabilized, the probe camera feed returned for less than 3 seconds, enough to confirm that the massive spherical construct inside the chamber was no longer rotating at the same slow speed, its outer rings accelerating in opposite directions, generating a faint glow along their edges as if frictionless energy fields were interacting in ways no one on the surface could explain. Colonel Hathaway, overseeing the operation from the tent, issued a direct order to extract immediately, but the transmission reached Mercer distorted and delayed, and before the team could retreat more than 100 feet from the breached doorway, a deep reverberation rolled through the corridor, not a tremor this time but a sound like distant thunder trapped inside metal, followed by a sudden rush of wind that seemed to originate from the chamber itself, pulling air inward rather than pushing it out, causing loose equipment to slide several inches across the floor. Cho turned just in time to see the fractured steel door panels twitch, as if responding to an unseen command, and then, impossibly, the crack along its edge began to seal, molten lines of light tracing the fracture until the breach closed seamlessly, trapping the team inside the tunnel. Panic threatened to break discipline, but Mercer forced his voice steady, ordering defensive formation and forward movement away from the sealed barrier, reasoning that whatever automated system had activated might control the tunnel in sections, and staying near the chamber could be the most dangerous position. As they advanced back toward the entry shaft, the corridor lights flickered from crimson to complete darkness, plunging them into blackness so absolute that even their night vision goggles struggled to compensate. And then, without warning, the tremor shifted into a rhythmic vibration beneath their boots, synchronized not with 217 but with their own footsteps, matching pace as if tracking them. Above ground, seismic graphs displayed a mirrored waveform corresponding exactly to the heart rates of the 6 operators below, a phenomenon that one civilian geologist described in a hushed voice as bio-responsive feedback, though no known military technology could account for such interaction. When the team finally reached the vertical shaft, relief flickered briefly until they discovered that the drilling platform had retracted automatically to the surface, leaving only a smooth, featureless ceiling where the opening should have been, the alloy panels seamless and unbroken, as though the tunnel itself had rewritten its own architecture. Mercer stared upward in disbelief, running a gloved hand across the metallic surface that moments earlier had been an open passage to safety, and for the first time since. Descending, he allowed a sliver of uncertainty to enter his tone as he reported the situation, but above ground, his words arrived fragmented, half swallowed by interference that grew stronger with each passing second. Colonel Hathaway made a decision that would later define his career, ordering immediate excavation from above regardless of detection risk, heavy machinery roaring to life under the cover of electronic jamming systems. Yet even as drills began tearing into the frozen hillside, their sensors indicated that the hollow cavity beneath was shifting laterally, sliding northward several feet at a time as if the entire subterranean complex was mobile. Inside the tunnel, Sergeant Cho detected a faint glow returning along the corridor walls, not from the recessed light strips but from the etched geometric symbols themselves, which now pulsed softly in alternating sequences, forming patterns that resembled pathways branching off the main corridor. One such pattern illuminated directly beside them, and with a hiss so subtle it was almost imagined, a section of wall retracted silently, revealing a narrow side passage previously invisible, descending at a slight angle deeper into the earth. Mercer understood the implication immediately. The tunnel was not collapsing, it was redirecting them, guiding them away from the original path, and though every instinct warned against proceeding further, remaining stationary in a structure capable of sealing exits was a greater risk. The team moved into the newly revealed passage, weapons ready, scanning every shadow as the corridor narrowed, the air growing warmer with each step, until they reached a chamber far smaller than the vast spherical hall, yet no less unsettling, because embedded into the curved walls were 6 alcoves shaped with unmistakable anatomical precision, each roughly the size and contour of a human body, lined with the same glowing etchings that had reacted to Mercer's touch earlier. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal bearing a surface identical to the indentation on the steel door, palm-sized, faintly luminous, as if awaiting contact. Cho whispered that it looked like a biometric interface, but no standard system required full-body recesses in symmetrical arrangement. Before anyone could respond, the rhythmic vibration beneath their boots ceased abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt oppressive, and in that silence, a new sound emerged, faint but distinct, like distant voices layered atop one another in frequencies just beyond clear comprehension. Back at the surface, drilling operations stalled as equipment malfunctioned simultaneously, screens flashing error codes that engineers had never seen before, while satellite feeds briefly captured a surge of electromagnetic distortion spreading outward from the hillside in concentric waves. Colonel Hathaway realized then that containment had failed, not in the sense of something escaping physically, but in the sense that the structure itself was broadcasting, transmitting a signal outward, and whatever it was communicating, it was not meant for human ears. Underground, Mercer approached the pedestal cautiously, every rational training protocol screaming against physical interaction. Yet the sealed exits left few alternatives, and as he extended his gloved hand toward the glowing indentation, the etched lines across the chamber walls intensified in brightness, synchronizing into a unified pattern that resembled a complex network diagram. And for a fleeting moment, Mercer hesitated, aware that this single action might trigger consequences beyond comprehension. But trapped in a living machine buried beneath one of the world's most volatile borders, hesitation offered no safety. So he pressed his palm firmly against the luminous surface, and the chamber responded. Instantly, the alcoves along the walls igniting with radiant light as if awakening, the distant layered voices sharpening into coherent tones, and far above them, on seismic monitors in the command tent, a new waveform appeared, one that did not correspond to geological activity, machinery, or heartbeats, but to something else entirely, a pattern repeating in structured intervals that analysts would later realize was not random noise but encoded data, streaming outward from the depths at precisely 2:23 a.m., 6 minutes after the tremor should have ended. The moment Captain Mercer's palm made full contact with the glowing indentation, the chamber reacted not with violence, but with precision, as if a long-dormant protocol had finally been completed. The 6 alcoves along the walls filled with cascading light that flowed upward in vertical streams, scanning the empty recesses from base to ceiling, while the pedestal beneath Mercer's hand pulsed in measured intervals, each pulse synchronized with the encoded waveform now streaming across monitors. On the surface, Sergeant Cho attempted to pull Mercer back, but his glove seemed magnetized to the interface, not physically fused, but held in place by an unseen force that resisted sudden movement, and within seconds, data began racing across Cho's wrist display, untranslated symbols replacing standard readouts, scrolling too fast for comprehension. Above ground, analysts watched in disbelief as their secure systems, isolated from external networks, began receiving packets of information. Directly through seismic relay channels, the underground structure using the Earth itself as a transmission medium, converting vibration into data, and what appeared on the screens was neither Korean nor Chinese nor any recognizable military encryption, but layered geometric sequences that repeated in evolving variations, almost like a language adapting in real time. Inside the chamber, Mercer's breathing grew shallow as the voices that had once been faint grew clearer, not audible in the traditional sense but resonating within the inner ear, harmonized tones forming fragments of structured sound that felt less like speech and more like mathematical instruction. Then, abruptly, the pedestal released him and he staggered back, eyes wide not with panic but with stunned recognition, though when Cho demanded to know what he had seen, Mercer struggled to articulate it, describing flashes of vast underground networks far beyond the single tunnel they had entered, corridors branching not just north and south but downward in spirals that extended miles beneath the peninsula, converging toward a central nexus depicted in luminous schematic form. He spoke of timelines layered atop each other, of construction phases predating the Korean War by decades, possibly centuries, and most disturbingly, of the spherical construct in the main chamber acting, not as a weapon, not as a generator, but as a synchronization core, aligning frequencies between multiple subterranean nodes. Before Cho could press for clarity, the alcoves along the walls shifted, their inner surfaces morphing subtly, no longer shaped solely for human anatomy but adjusting dimensions in fluid increments, as if calibrating for unknown variables. A low hum filled the chamber again, deeper now, resonating in bone rather than air, and the side passage through which they had entered sealed behind them with seamless efficiency. Mercer regained composure and ordered a tactical sweep, though the sense of conventional engagement had evaporated, replaced by the unsettling awareness that they were participants in a system far older and more sophisticated than any battlefield scenario. When Cho attempted to transmit a status update, his voice carried clearly this time, the interference gone, but what returned through his earpiece was not Colonel Hathaway's steady command tone, instead it was a delayed echo of his own transmission, layered with additional harmonics, as if the tunnel were analyzing and replaying their communication in modified form. On the surface, drilling had ceased entirely, machinery disabled by repeated. Beneath it, shifting constellations of symbols that flowed like circuitry, and then it stepped forward out of the alcove without disturbing the air, stopping inches from Mercer's visor. At that precise second, every seismic monitor above ground flatlined, not from loss of signal but from total synchronization, the Earth itself vibrating at a single unified frequency that matched the pulse radiating from the spherical core in the main chamber. Hathaway stared at the data, realizing that the tremor had expanded beyond the hillside, spreading outward in concentric rings detectable hundreds of miles away. subtle enough to evade civilian notice but deliberate in pattern. Underground, Mercer felt an overwhelming surge of images flood his mind again. Not chaotic this time but structured, showing coastlines, tectonic plates, and deep mantle currents, all overlaid with the same network lattice they had seen projected above the pedestal. And at the center of the visualization was the Korean Peninsula, marked not as a battleground but as a junction point. The silhouette raised its hand slowly, mirroring Mercer's earlier gesture, and placed its luminous palm against his chest plate. And though there was no physical pressure, every sensor in his suit spiked simultaneously, recording a burst of data transmitted directly through conductive fibers. Cho shouted for him to step back, but Mercer remained still, eyes fixed on the glowing figure as the chamber lights intensified to near blinding brilliance, and in that moment, above ground and across international monitoring stations, a new seismic pulse registered globally, faint yet measurable, originating not from tectonic shift but from a synchronized emission beneath the DMZ, time-stamped precisely at 2:31 a.m., and for the first time since the operation began, analysts realized that the tunnel was not reacting defensively to intrusion, it was initiating something, and the 6 alcoves along the chamber walls illuminated fully in unison, as if awaiting 5 more reflections to step forward. The 6 alcoves did not remain empty for long, because the moment the luminous silhouette stepped fully clear of the wall and touched Mercer's chest plate, the remaining recesses began generating faint outlines of the other 5 operators, imperfect at first, flickering and unstable, but rapidly refining in detail as if drawing information directly from their biological signatures, and Sergeant Cho felt a cold wave of realization wash over him as he understood that the structure was not merely scanning individuals, it was preparing counterparts. Above ground, seismic stations as far away as Japan and eastern Russia registered a subtle harmonic anomaly traveling through the crust, too consistent to be natural, too coordinated to be coincidence, yet subtle enough to avoid public detection, while classified defense satellites detected a low-orbit electromagnetic shimmer centered over the DMZ, as if something beneath the surface were interacting with the ionosphere. Underground, Mercer staggered backward as the luminous figure withdrew its hand, and though no physical injury appeared, his helmet cam briefly displayed a cascade of unknown glyphs overlaying his vision, suggesting direct neural interface beyond standard sensory input, and when he tried to speak, his first words were not English but a sequence of structured phonetic sounds that none of the team recognized, tones rising and falling in mathematical rhythm before he regained control and switched back to coherent speech. Cho demanded status, but Mercer's answer chilled the chamber more than the artificial cold ever could, because he said he could see the connections, describing a network spanning continents, with nodal points beneath other geopolitical flashpoints across the globe, dormant yet synchronized, and the spherical construct in the primary chamber acting as one of several synchronization cores. Before further explanation could unfold, the smaller chamber trembled again, not violently but rhythmically, and the holographic lattice above the pedestal expanded outward, projecting additional layers that extended beyond the Korean Peninsula to distant landmasses, faint pulses marking coordinates in patterns that mirrored tectonic fault intersections. Above ground, Colonel Hathaway received urgent intelligence that North Korean radar arrays had spiked simultaneously, with U.S. systems, both sides detecting identical subterranean harmonics yet neither understanding the source, and the terrifying symmetry of that confusion meant escalation risk was rising by the minute. Inside the chamber, the 5 remaining alcoves stabilized fully, each now containing a luminous double of an operator, standing motionless but perfectly aligned with their real counterparts' posture, breathing rhythm, and micro-movements, as if awaiting activation. One by one, the doubles opened their eyes, revealing not pupils but concentric rings of shifting symbols, and then, without warning, they stepped forward in unison. Weapons were raised instinctively, but Mercer ordered hold fire, because he sensed what Cho had not yet accepted, that the structure was not replicating them for attack, but for calibration. The doubles stopped inches away from each operator, mirroring them exactly, and a faint beam of light extended from each luminous chest to its human counterpart, connecting heart to heart in silent exchange, and instantly every biometric monitor on their suits spiked into synchronized rhythm, heartbeats aligning perfectly across all 6 men. On the surface, seismic graphs flattened into a single harmonic waveform once more, stronger now, broadcasting outward in widening circles, and Intelligence analysts realized with dawning horror that the pulse was not random. It was structured in prime number intervals, a deliberate mathematical signature impossible to attribute to natural geology. Underground, the spherical core in the main chamber accelerated further, its rotating rings emitting arcs of faint blue energy that danced between their edges without physical contact. And through the sealed corridor walls, the team could feel the resonance intensifying, building toward something that felt less like collapse and more like ignition. Mercer suddenly understood that the Korean peninsula was not chosen for military advantage but for geological convergence, a junction where tectonic stress, magnetic flux, and human conflict overlapped in uniquely volatile balance, and that this underground network had been waiting not for invasion, but for synchronization with living neural patterns capable of completing its circuit. Cho shouted that they needed to break the connection, but as he reached to step back, his luminous counterpart mirrored the movement perfectly, preventing separation without force. Above ground, global seismic networks detected a synchronized pulse echoing faintly beneath other disputed territories worldwide, dormant nodes flickering momentarily as if awakened by the activation beneath the DMZ, and classified communications channels lit up across multiple governments simultaneously, confusion spreading faster than information. Underground, Mercer closed his eyes as another surge of structured imagery flooded his mind, showing planetary cross-sections and energy flows deep within the mantle, converging not toward destruction but toward stabilization, as if the network functioned as a pressure regulator for tectonic imbalance, and humanity's conflict zones were merely surface symptoms of deeper geological stress. The luminous doubles began dissolving gradually, their forms fragmenting into streams of symbols that flowed back into the alcoves, and the connecting beams between hearts narrowed into single threads before snapping softly like tension released. And in that instant every seismic monitor above ground registered a final synchronized spike, far stronger than any before, time-stamped precisely at 2:47 a.m. The tremor then ceased completely, not gradually but absolutely, leaving a silence so profound that operators above ground feared equipment failure. Yet readings confirmed the Earth had returned to baseline. Inside the chamber, the holographic lattice collapsed into a single point of light above the pedestal before fading entirely. The alcoves dimmed, and the side passage reopened silently, revealing the main corridor once more. Mercer exhaled slowly, steady now, and reported upward through restored comms that the system had completed a cycle. Though he could not fully explain how he knew, only that the activation was neither hostile nor random, but corrective. Above ground, Colonel Hathaway faced a decision that would remain classified for decades, because open disclosure of a subterranean planetary stabilization network beneath the most volatile border on Earth would shatter geopolitical narratives overnight, and so orders were issued to seal the vertical shaft permanently, document findings under the highest clearance tier, and classify Task Force Iron Veil as an abandoned seismic anomaly investigation. As dawn approached over the frozen ridgeline, U.S. forces withdrew quietly, leaving no visible trace of excavation, while beneath the soil, 300 feet below, the alloy panels dimmed to dormant state. The spherical core slowed to near stillness, and the network returned to silent watchfulness, awaiting the next convergence of stress, conflict, and human presence. Years later, scattered seismic anomalies would puzzle independent researchers, and rumors of hidden tunnels would circulate endlessly. But none would uncover the truth that on a single winter night in 1996, beneath one of the most guarded borders on Earth, something ancient and precise had awakened briefly, synchronized with 6 human minds, corrected a planetary imbalance, and then returned to silence, leaving behind only classified files and a question that still lingers in the shadows. Was the tunnel ever built for war at all? Or was war merely the surface noise above something far deeper?